today, myself, Joe, and my partner in crime, Doug, will be speaking to a former employee of Home-Start Glasgow South who actually started the dad work or the dad
That's
movement
right.
with Home-Start.
Yeah.
A good friend of Doug.
Yeah, so you'll be meeting Ryan Warren. As Joe mentioned, he worked with Home-Start Glasgow South. He started the dad's work here. So in a sense, he was the forerunner of what we're doing. I think people are built differently. Some people can start things, other people can carry things on. And we're really thankful for the groundwork Ryan
Some people
laid.
can break things, like myself.
Yeah, don't break anything more, Joe. And I think it's really great that I'm thankful for the work he's done, because we're in a
We're
place
in a row
where,
because of him, yeah.
yeah, and we want to carry that forward and just make sure that we're staying true to what the ideas were. I'm trying to remember the timeline. I think we're in the 6th or 7th year of Dad's work at Home-Start Glasgow South, and Ryan was absolutely instrumental in getting that going. And I think when we look more broadly in Scotland, what's going on with support for dads and advocating for dads, it's changed a lot in that time. There are newer organisations that have come along. There's a lot better collaboration and understanding, information sharing, research that's going on. So it's really been a pivotal time. But we're not going to kind of sit back and say, well, that's it, it's done. We still see there's so much in terms of need and support. So it's going to be good picking Ryan's brains. Yeah, that works.
Yeah.
And just to see how he sees things at the moment. He's going to share a little bit of his backstory. I have asked him if that's okay, so we're not going to spring it on him. He's not going to feel obliged to share things. Ryan, I don't know if Ryan's done a podcast before, but he's very media savvy, as you'll see, and maybe we'll learn a few things from him. So
yeah, I'm home to it, because I've never met Ryan before, but he started the Gowan Bank group that I run my dad's club from, and everybody that came in the group that knew Ryan before absolutely love him, and I keep getting compared to him. Ryan
I face the same thing in life. Yes.
That's fine. I'll up my game, hopefully. So I'm looking forward to meeting him, having a wee chat, picking his brains, and hopefully we can all learn something for this.
Yeah, and Ryan is a great chat, and we really. Yeah, it's good to have him. I haven't seen him in a while. I think so much, the pandemic changed so much, and I think that, as you know, that's one of the reasons there's schools and everything, the groups shut down. And a lot of the work, as you know, is getting momentum going in the groups, getting a foothold. It's not just, you don't just flick a switch and everything works right off bat. You've got to build relationships, build momentum, get the word out.
I was just about to say that. You need to build it back up, don't you?
Yeah. So it's not easy, it's not quick, but there's definite benefits to it. We see that, and so we persevere, and it's good. I'm glad I'm involved with the work we do, and I know you're enjoying it. So we're going to hear from Ryan to see what he's doing now, and also just for his thoughts on Dad's work and what he's seeing with the families he's working with.
Excellent.
Welcome, Ryan.
It's nice to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad you could make it. We were just saying how you were the pioneer of the work here at Home-Start Glasgow South. I think it was, 7 years ago now, something like that?
When did I start?
Approximately?
So, yeah, it would have been 8 years ago.
Yeah.
But didn't start as Dad's work. Started as a family worker, and had the pleasure to take some of those dad projects forward.
Excellent. And I think we always look at it and say, all right, we're here because someone else has done the groundwork. It's been I know it was a lot of work for you. You did a lot of innovation. I think you were willing to try things that if they didn't work, they didn't work, but you were willing to try, which I think is a huge difference in making things work. I think a lot of people just expect to press a button and it naturally all falls into place, which is very far from reality. Any initial thoughts, just thinking back to those early days, sort of your motivators, what did you see that made you think, hey, you know what, we need to focus a bit more on dads?
Well, yeah, I mean, I joined Home-Start because I was a dad with a young child, and I did not have it all figured out. I didn't know quite what I was doing. And I could see friends around me with similarly aged kids that I was like, okay, I'm not the only one who feels this way. Like, maybe something I could do about that. So I joined Home-Start as a family worker, and in joining was quite quickly aware that our support was family support, but it was mums that we were working with, and I had kind of the hope that we could go beyond that. Well, where's Dad? What about Dad? Where's he exist in this? And it was a shame because in Glasgow there just wasn't many things around that were catered to Dad. How we could get him in the door, how we could communicate more with them, how we could just get a better interaction and a better support directly to Dad. Because not to negate the support at all, it was great that the work we were doing would benefit the whole family. But in a lot of these situations, Dad was maybe more of a passive beneficiary of the support. And I'm like, no, I'm one of these dads who could have used a hand.
Right.
And so that's where I kind of started to ask those questions. Okay, but could we try this?
Yeah.
Could we do this? Is there another way that we could do this to interact with more guys? And thankfully, the management and the team here listened and gave me opportunities. Opportunities went well. Sometimes they didn't, but the ones that did, what didn't go well, we learnt from. What did go well, we learned from, and we just kept pushing forward. And before I knew it, I was helping write an application for some dad-specific funding, stretch out in that support for dads and try bigger, more challenging things.
Yeah, fantastic. I think I'm very thankful that we have management that allows us to try things. I mean,
yeah, definitely, because
we had to not sell the podcast to them, but we had to show that we did the homework and we were going to pursue something that was worthwhile.
Well, that's the thing with Home-Start. They're very open to new ideas as well. I'm hired as a dad's coordinator. That role, as you were just saying, didn't exist when you started.
No.
And now there's two of us. And it's always expanding, which is great.
We've seen in the dad space, we've seen a number of other organisations taking it on. We've got organisations that have been doing it for much longer, such as Dad's Rock. And we're seeing a number of other sort of entities coming to the party, as it were. And I think we've reached a point where, what would count as critical mass, I don't know, but we've reached a point where it's no longer, I think some people would think it was just flavour of the month, and it's not that anymore. It's like this is something real, dads, because we're continuously talking to dads who are, reflecting these same things. We had a difficult birth, there was no support, I'm struggling with my 4-year-old, with this or that or the next thing. It's not as if it's dwindled away. It's not as if this is not an issue anymore. There's still a lot of dads really looking for and needing support out there. Yeah,
and I think the difference from now to maybe a number of years ago is there's a lot more dads involved in the raising of their kids. I'm just thinking back to how involved my dad was, especially when I was really young. It's completely different to how it is now.
Yes.
And I think it's only going to get better. Dads are going to keep getting more involved. Most guys I know want to be involved with their kids.
I think the figure is about 97% of dads are present at the birth. That's the latest figure I heard, which is pretty high. I think in the 1970s it was something like 30%.
Yeah.
So in a generation or two, we've seen a huge shift in sort of attitudes towards being involved and being present. And of course, that's a lot of what we're recovering. I'm just wondering, Ryan, when you, talking more about yourself and when you found out you were going to be a dad, what was the initial thought?
Excitement. We tried and planned for our first. Only got to try for 2 weeks before we conceived.
It's funny, off air, me and Doug were talking about this. We never tried for our first kid. She was kind of like a surprise. My partner was actually on the pill.
Wow.
But our second, we decided we didn't want a big age gap, so we're going to try.
You know, it's a tricky thing to talk about sometimes because
Yeah.
I have many friends that try for years. Friends that have had, you know, friends that have had miscarriages, friends that have
Tried IVF and stuff like that.
I don't say, you know, we did 2 weeks lighthearted. Well, I do say it lightheartedly, but at the same time, it's like, you know, everybody has their own journey in that.
Yeah.
And so for me, we were excited. You know, it was right. Okay, this is happening. So what do we do now? I'm the eldest of 10 children.
Right.
So I've always been around kids. I've always been the babysitter or the responsible one, and so I kind of felt pretty prepared for what you do with kids. Probably wasn't as prepared for the emotional aspect.
If you don't mind me asking, Ryan, what age were you when you became a father?
29.
That's funny. I was 29 as well.
Yeah.
And I remember when my missus told me when we were going to have our first kid, I was 29, and the first thing I said to myself, quietly to myself, was that, my God, I'm too young for this. I am not ready for this. Like, I'm 29, like, I don't know how to raise a kid. I still want to go and party a wee bit, you know. I'm only 29, I'm not even 30 yet.
My dad was 19, my mum was 18, so like, yeah.
29's not a young dad. You know, I don't think so. Know where I came from. You know, I know lots of guys I grew up with were 17, 18 when they had their kids, you know, and I'm like crying about having a kid at 29.
I think there's a definite shift where, you know, there's a trend where we're having kids older. But yeah, I think looking back, your early 20s were perfectly normal to have kids, or perfectly acceptable, or maybe society just could allow that, you know, just financially, economically. These days people are going, whoa, hang on a minute, we need to get a lot in place before we have a kid.
Yeah, that's true.
And that trend is sort of upward. But yeah, it's just funny how those things change from generation to generation.
I didn't really think of any of the economic side of it. It was more the excitement and the journey and the expanding of the family for us. And as much as like we did feel the economic side of things, and where we'd moved from kind of where I lived to closer to where my wife's family lived, so English. My wife's Scottish, she's from Kilmarnock, but we moved to Glasgow. We wanted kind of a bit of city life. And then we were still closer to her family, like half an hour away. So we kind of felt we had a good kind of support structure around us. And so yeah, when we found out, it was like, yeah, brilliant, let's do this. And then it happened, and it was like, what the heck did we do? Why did we do this?
So, you know, I know you had planned this, but when it really came down to it, do you feel you were ready or prepared? Like,
to an extent, like I say, I've always known what to do with kids. So like some of the physical, practical side of things, I was comfortable with. Like I knew what that was going to entail. However, I'd never been the caregiver, and so I wasn't prepared for the lack of sleep. I wasn't prepared for kind of how emotional it would be. Like my son, when he was born, so he's my first, it really hit me quite heavy, like the overwhelming sense of responsibility. It was much easier with siblings and cousins and friends' kids to be like, brilliant, I've kept them fed and clean for the day, now they're back to you, and it's like, hang on a minute, I have nobody to pass this child on to. This is my child. I have to deal with this. So yeah, and then the emotional and the relationship change. So that's something I've always kind of talked to other dads about, is the difference in your marital or partner, like your relationship with your partner. The dynamics of you now no longer being a two but being a three, and how your priorities change, and how actually, do you know what? I'm not my wife's first priority anymore.
Yeah, no, definitely, you definitely get shifted.
And that can be quite a tough one sometimes to follow and sort of accept, or maybe that's the secret, is accepting it, because if you're going to battle that, you might just give yourself a lot of strain and a headache for quite some time. Was there any specific challenge around that, or could you give any sort of tips or guidelines on that to people?
Naming it. So, I mean, for a time, mine and my wife's relationship was difficult because we were just so tired. You know, everything was harder. Going to work was harder. Coming home and dealing with life was harder. We had this beautiful little thing in our life now, but everything else around us, like, there was less money, there was less time, there was less energy. And so when that's the case, not only is life in general harder, but to acknowledge the fact that we were, you know, maybe a bit more strained with each other, is probably the politest way to say it. To acknowledge, you know, we're joking there about conceiving, but like, hey, sex life is not a priority anymore, and even less so to my partner. You know, just in general, like, your relationship changes. Yeah. And not necessarily in a bad way. Like, in a way, it helped me grow up a little bit more at 29, knowing that actually I'm not the most important person in the world. Actually, right now, my wife isn't the most important person in the world. This little person is, and so that means I need to sacrifice my time, my energy, my finances, my desires, you know. And I think some people get a really good balance with that, and they acknowledge that from the get-go. And I think that's an area we didn't recognise prior to having kids, was what impact that would have on us.
Yeah, I think people, that's the biggest changes, is the amount of time you're sacrificing, or you know, the more time you put into your kids, I always feel the better you're doing, you know, and it's hard trying to adjust that the time now isn't yours. You know, I'm used to having all this time to do what I want to do, and going for that to, oh my God, I don't have any time now. This is all, you know, I had a wee girl, so this is all my wee girl's time, which was fine, and I accepted it, and it was, you know, at 29, I was nearly 30, I was turning 30. That was fine for me. I think it's even harder for younger dads to have that willingness to sacrifice the amount of time and effort that goes into being a really good dad.
Yeah, I think you see when you get involved with someone, people say, well, when you get a partner, you'll realise how selfish you are and you'll change, and for the partner, and in a sense that's true, and you think, oh, well, actually now I'm doing really well, I'm considerate, I'm not really selfish. When the kid comes along, you really see how, and selfish I use a little bit loosely, because it's just, you know, you don't know what to expect with a child, and then you realize when they come along, it's like, whoa, actually this is 24/7. I can't just go take an hour's break somewhere, you know. It's how do I support my partner, the childcare element, what do I do, and how do we engage? So yeah, I think, you know, that's
where my tip would come in, really. My tip of teamwork. I always, as you'll know through antenatal classes we did together, used the analogy of a tag team. I was always a big wrestling fan, so for me, I kind of looked at it and thought, our kid doesn't need both of us at the same time all the time. And so we identified the fact that we didn't have enough time to do what we needed to keep ourselves well. So it was a case of identifying times where, do you know what? You need to go and take some time for you, for your health, for your well-being. So tag out, right? Yeah. Tag out, I'm in the ring now, I've got this. And I think for many dads, like, the idea of you're out working all day, missus is on mat leave, you're coming home, and not acknowledging that they've been in the ring just as much as you have all day. No matter what job you're doing, being a parent is hard work. Yeah. It is hard work. And not having conversations or adult human interaction, you know, is hard. So we adopted very much a tagging out process, and that involved life, but it also involved when our child was being hard. So at the times when he'd have colic or was unwell or was going through one of the many phases that babies have where they cry a lot, it was a case of saying, right, looking out for each other and assessing, okay, are they tired? Are they needing a break now? And so instead of it being just this absolute loving relationship, it became more of a team, and more of a, like, it's time to sub you off.
Yeah,
I'm coming on the pitch, or I'm going in the ring.
It's funny you use the wrestling terminology, because that's the exact same thing me and my missus done. We'd say, right, I'm tagging out, you're in. You know, we're quite wrestling fans as well, but yeah, we've done the exact same thing. It's funny you use that, because you know, you think, oh, that's just a wee thing, but you know, it's not. It's you know, when I would see maybe things were getting too much for her, or she would say things are getting too much for me. Hey, tag out, I'm in, and we would do the exact same thing, and it worked quite well. It worked really well for us, you know, and allowed you just to get a wee bit of a breather and rethink where you are, where you need to be, and just gives you a wee bit of time to yourself when you were tagged out.
Yeah,
I think you also get to observe your partner, and then you get to see the situation, and and that maybe something you've not noticed before, but in this situation, it's okay. I think, yeah, you feel you need a break. Yeah, all right. Okay, I'm in. Go on, take your break.
Yeah.
You're out. And you know, it just helps. It's sort of increased and improved communication of just being able to look and assess and go, yeah, you know what, I'm tired, I'm back from work, but hey, you've had a whole day of looking after baby.
Yeah.
You go take a break, go grab a shower, you know.
The communication with that's really important as well, so that your partner or yourself, you don't feel judged about being tired, because judgment's such a big thing for, you know, young mums, you know, new parents even, of, am I being tagged out because I'm not doing this right? Like, you know, why? No, I've got this. You know, I'm on this. No, I'm not doing it. And it's that way of making sure that you name it. Like I said before, name it, talk about it, say, hey, there are going to be times where we're not going to be. So I need you to say to me, this is one of those times I need out.
Yeah.
And know that that's okay to say, I've hit my limit. I can't do any more today. And also to be able to be called out on that and say, hey, you seem really past your limits today. You're gonna go take a lie down and let me take over. Because there would be times where I'd be like, no, like, if you tag me out now, that means I've got less time. Like, it's like, no, you got to do it from a place of well-being, and you got to do it from a place of a well-communicated kind of aspect of, look, for your greater good, for the baby's greater good, like, we need to make sure we're looking after ourselves here, so that we can do the best job for them.
Yeah, I think there's so much wisdom in there. We often have this idealized version of what it must be like to be parents, and especially this issue of, now I need to perform. And I think for mums, they feel it probably a lot more than dads do. They're a mum. They have this huge responsibility. They need to not be tired. They need to be present. They need to be everything. And then to actually suggest that maybe they do need a break. It's like, well, don't tell me what I need to be like, you know. And that, I'm not talking from experience, in case my wife's listening to this podcast, but it's we see so much. I mean, we talk about in the antenatal workshop about mums going into the ward, you know, and we're shown the door politely, you know, an hour or two later, and mums are now on their own in a busy open ward with 5 other mums. There's visitors and everything, and now she's got to be mum. She's just run a marathon. She's totally energy sapped, and now she's got to perform, as it were, and she feels and she wants to step up to it. Whereas we're shown the door and we can go call our mates and tell them all, you know, what experience we had. And I think this is always, I don't know how you feel about it, Ryan, what your assessment is, but I think there's this finding the role. And I think stemming from when we see dads who are saying, right, I'm part of this, I'm part of the birthing, I'm part of the pregnancy. I know I'm not the one giving birth, but how do they establish the role? And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are as they transitions to once baby's there, how dads sort of assess that and how they feel, how much of this is mom's and how much of this is mine, and how do they engage better, just with not only the baby but with their partner?
Yeah, I look at that and think about the communication, finding your niche. So like, my kids now are 9 and 7, and there are areas of my parenting life that I'm terrible at, absolutely awful at.
Same here.
And there are areas where I'm far better than my wife, and that's okay. As long as we can align on that, as long as we can acknowledge our skills and weaknesses. And so it's not about being perfect at everything. It's not about being perfect at all.
Yeah.
But, for me, I would find, because in the early days when my wife was on mat leave, doing long shifts, I'd come home and the feeds would be done. The baby would be, our son would be like fed, watered, cleaned. So I'm like, okay, so what can I do now? Like, and I think that was an important thing to me, was trying to find my role. And at the very beginning, it was tricky because my wife was there all the time. So I'd say in the earliest days of being a new parent, it was probably more as a support to my partner, when I was still trying to figure out what my role was, or how I could interact with my son, how I could, get to know him and what I could do. But then, excuse me, on the days where I would have, so after about 9 months, I dropped to like part-time. I was at home with him like half of the week as the primary caregiver. And so then there was areas where I'm like, oh, I'm really terrible at this part. Like, how does she do this? And it's communicating, it's kind of finding, okay, what was your method with this? I think one of the things that I was always good at, I wasn't necessarily the fun dad, I was the organised dad. I still am that way. My kids do point out that mum is a lot more fun than I am, but I'm very practical. So I knew my son needed to socialise more, so when it came to my days off with him, I would seek out whatever opportunity we could to kind of go out and do stuff. I would go out of my own comfort zone because I don't like socialising, but my 9-month-old needed it, and so I'm like, oh, I'm going to do that. But yeah, I think if I've heard the question right, I think finding your role as a parent, finding the things that you're good at, acknowledging the things that you're bad at, and try and improve, but also hopefully you build that dynamic with your partner. And if you don't have a partner, that you build that dynamic with your circle, with your close friends and family that are there to help, that you can say, hey, I need a hand in this, and be comfortable knowing that you're not perfect and they don't need perfect.
I think that's key, knowing that they don't need perfect, because I think one of the shocking elements, like you say, is when you find out that you can't do what your partner does, and maybe you in your mind beforehand thought, hey, I'll be good at this. You try it and it's an utter disaster, and it's such a train wreck that it's obvious to your partner. You can't. It's like you've set fire to something. You can't hide the fact that you set fire to the dinner, right? And so when you're engaging with your kid and you think, oh, I'll be good at this, and then it's just so awfully bad. A number of things for me, I look at and I'm like, I thought I'd be so much better at this, and yet I see my wife do it, and it's while it may be difficult, she gets it done, and she just has this way. Whether it's demeanor or approach, whatever it is, it's mine, where I thought, hey, I'd be good. I'm rubbish. But learning that about myself is, again, it's not a failure. It's like, it's learning. It's like, oh, actually, yeah, that's not me. And then I can sit and think about why it's not me, and why doing this thing is not my thing with the kids. And then, but what is my thing? And you find it, and I think that's also a great element to it.
Mine was reading stories to my son.
All right. Okay.
So I did the voices. I overacted. So like now that my kids see me all the time, but like in those days it was like when they were that reading to without feedback.
All right.
they were great because they were a captive audience, and now I'm not cool anymore. But in those days, I'd do it, whereas my wife would just read the book. So they enjoyed bedtime more with me at that time. It's funny because I just said I wasn't fun, but that's kind of the one area I excelled at, and I loved doing it because then I did get to be a bit more silly and get to partake in the not so serious aspect of parenting. But I loved doing that, and my wife would get a bit annoyed at like, I do like you doing that more than me, like because I can do several accents in one book, and and it's an area that I always share for other dads and new dads to do, from the earliest possible stage, just do that reading with them, because
even just reading to a baby bump, you know what I mean, like you don't think they would pay attention or recognise you, but I used to read quite a lot to the baby bump as such, in a different voice for what I would my normal voice. And when my wee girl was born, she was lying a few weeks old even. She was lying, and I did the voice, and she sprung out, like her neck just totally tugged to look where this voice. I recognised this voice, and it was a different voice that my regular speaking voice, and it was like, oh, she recognised the voice. But I totally agree. I used to, my missus read books to the kids, and then I would go in and do the voices, and they were like, oh, we want Daddy to read the book tonight. and it actually quite upset my missus that I was stealing this wee thing that she had going. I kind of drifted away from it a wee bit, but it was always fun doing the voices.
I think that's why my wife gives my kids more biscuits than I do. Is to kind of reclaim some of those parent points. It's like, he doesn't give you 2 Kit Kats, so
at the end of the day, if you can provide sugar, you can have them do things and like you. I know we've talked a lot about your first child, and I know a little bit about the backstory to your second child and how that went. So I know the story, if you can share. And by the way, if you're listening, I've asked Ryan if it's okay to talk about this. I'm not just dumping it on him and just giving him a hard time. So I have asked if he would like to, if he's free to talk about that, and he is. So I know a bit about the backstory regarding your daughter's birth. If you could, and that's just more along the lines of, this is something that came up that you weren't expecting, and just how you and your family dealt with it.
So, first child, Ray, everything went as planned and as expected as it could. What I like to refer to as a very boring birth. Quite a boring journey leading up. It was great. That's what I encourage and hope for every parent, is for it to be as boring as possible. At the 20-week scan for my daughter Hope, it was a bit more exciting, and not in a fun way. So my daughter, at the 20-week scan, I was at work that day. Because everything had gone so boring the first time round, my wife's like, it's just a scan, you don't need to come, just go to work. Cool. I go to work, and then get a distressed call from my wife, crying her eyes out. You need to come to the hospital. Okay. So I get there, and we have 2 doctors sat with my wife. They haven't said anything to her yet, but she knows if there's 2 doctors there, it's not good news. So they explained that my daughter's heart on the scan had one of the 4 chambers non-functioning. So what was positive was that blood was flowing through it, but it didn't work. And so at that point, they explained that this congenital heart defect could develop in any number of ways. And they wouldn't know until she was born and took her very first breath how that would impact her physically forever. And they actually gave us the choice at that point to terminate the pregnancy, and said that she could live a very, very difficult life, or she could be perfectly fine. And we would not know until she was born if we chose to go that route. And we chose not to find out if there was any, like, the chromosomes for, like, Downs or anything like that. I've grown up with special needs in my family. my siblings, and so for us, we were willing to kind of deal with whatever came up, and so we went along. So all the scans from the 20th till the birth, it's still there. We still don't know what's going to happen. And so we were just kind of riding it out. We came to the night of labour, and I remember it was a very quick process, and it was quite scary actually. Not like you're waiting for the birth of your child, but you don't know if that birth is what's going to happen. You have no idea what's going to happen. And we weren't even really prepared for like the actual practical of the immediate birth. So as soon as she was born, she was whisked away from us and put under a light, and there was like 7 doctors, created a wall between us and her, and they were checking her over. And what was probably 1 minute, maybe 2 minutes of them just assessing her, checking her, could have been less, felt like an eternity. Is our child okay? And after that 1 or 2 minutes, they brought her back to us, and we're like, cool. I'm like, okay, cool. What? Like, she should be okay. So her lungs had inflated, her heart was going. Still, the 4th chamber didn't work. That wasn't the worst thing in the world. Like, it could have, like, any number of things could have happened at that point. But she was, for all intents and purposes, okay. When she was 6 months or 5 months old, she had her first open heart surgery to start work of correcting how the heart works. And thankfully, up until that point, we had no complications. We were expecting numerous, but we were very, very lucky. And not long before her 5th birthday, we had a second open heart surgery, which again, it was all about rewiring the heart and setting her up for more long term. And again, that went really well. We're very lucky. I mean, our daughter is, she's eligible for Make-A-Wish. She has effectively a palliative heart condition, so she will, when she grows up, potentially need a heart transplant, depending on how science moves between now and then. And, we kind of live in a state where she's just a normal kid, but underlying with that is the fact that she has, well, we call it half a heart. She does have half a heart, half of a working heart. But she is the most vivacious, excitable, capable. I call her feral. She is the most energetic child that I've ever met. She does not tire. Prior to her surgery at 4 years, she would get very cold quick. She would turn blue at times. She didn't have the energy levels that other kids her age would have. Since then, I've questioned the hospital and what batteries they've inserted into her at that point, because now she's a little ass kicker. She is.
I can confirm. I know her. She's
feisty, man. And so from the point that we knew that was the case with her, from the point she was born, one thing we were always aware of is that we didn't want what was inside to affect the outside, and so we've never held her back. We didn't want. We knew what her limitations could be, and we've always let her go to that boundary and establish her own boundaries. And if she goes over the line, then we help her rest and relax. But she's not struggled. I mean, with the other kids with the same condition, complications are to be expected, and we've been very, very lucky. And so she's just a feisty little girl who I always refer to her as a world conqueror. I tell her she's going to rule the world one day, because nothing holds her back. And if having half of a heart can't slow her down. There's no person on this planet that will. She can do anything she wants.
Yeah. Do you have anything that you'd like dads and parents to know? I mean, you found out at the 20-week scan, and we know that the scans can be, I remember sitting in the waiting rooms for the scans, and you go in. It's a fairly somber place, I think, because of the nature of pregnancy. We know there are issues, and the scan, of course, is probably going to be the first time something's flagged up. Is there anything in that period after the 20-week scan where any advice, any guidance you could give to parents? I hear what you're saying in terms of there's a lot, it could have gone many different ways. Mm-hmm. What would be your guidance? Because that's something I've not experienced it, and I would just not know what to say or do. What would you, how would you encourage people, or what would you guide them on?
I don't know the answer to that, but I think in relation to it, I would say that I have regrets. So because that was hanging over us, it made it really difficult for me from the 20-week scan until she was about 6 months old or so, definitely after her first surgery, to really connect with her. Like, I felt terrible for a long time that I lived in a place of fear that we could lose her at any moment. So whether it was during the pregnancy or when she was born, or when we get to surgery, my brain could not, I didn't feel like I could invest myself in my daughter to be. And I regret that. I regret that, like, throughout the pregnancy, I was probably more shut off and more distant. And that was a coping mechanism. That mm-hmm. was self-defense on my part. Like, I didn't want to overly invest in this child that I was going to lose. Mm-hmm. And, as optimistic as I tried to be, I just constantly felt that was what was going to happen.
Did you receive any emotional support at any point during this?
There was nothing. I mean,
nothing available.
We were kind of directed to information about children with a similar condition, but there wasn't really much by means of support for it. We looked into like support for kids with this condition. There wasn't really much about pre-birth.
Yeah.
And all we saw was horror stories. It's the same as when you go on Google and search, I have this thing on my foot. Your result is death. Like, I've got a cough. Dr. Google says, probably going to die.
Yeah.
So, like, when we went on Google and looked at, or Facebook and looked at kids with this condition.
Worst case scenario, boom, boom, boom.
It was, and, people were sharing their stories, and they were not positive stories. And it really kind of put us in a mental place of preparing for the worst. And so my preparing for the worst resulted in me not
putting up like a barrier or a shield to
I put that shutter up
emotionally,
and I pulled that shutter down even, and didn't connect. And then when my daughter was born, that first 6 months, I've said before to people, like, I'm totally honest, I did not have love for my daughter. Like, it was, I feel like such a horrible person.
So
like,
what changed? At what point was it the surgery it changed and you went, oh, she's going to be okay?
I think
Can
so.
Let my barrier down a wee bit?
I think when she came out of the surgery and we kind of knew that we had not guaranteed longer, we had more chance of things lasting longer. I had to wake up and go, do you know what? I don't know how long I'm going to have my daughter for, but I need to actually reassess where my mind and where my heart is on this, and I have to have more faith. Like, whatever happens, I need to be more present here. And so I do regret not coming to that conclusion earlier. But then I know that wasn't a conscious decision of mine.
So I know we're talking about this now. How long was it before you could speak up about these feelings? Was there a time, or could you just, was it?
I'd say, I think after I started to realise it, I think I was vocal about it. I said to people, look, actually, listen, I've not been in this. My head has not been in it. And don't get me wrong, I changed the nappies. I fed her. I did all the things that I needed to do.
Yeah, you were there in the practical sense.
Yeah, but my mind and my heart was not there, and I regret it now. I don't think I've course corrected and overshot on the other side now. I mean, she is, like I say, we've treated her just like any other child ever since, and I love her to bits. I don't have favourites. She is awesome, but you know, I've not like gone now the other way, but I now just treat her as normal, and I act as normal with her. And yeah, like I say, she's just you see her in the street, you'd have no clue that she's like half a heart, or that she, yeah. It's that kind of funny thing where we literally, Taylor Swift's coming to town, like we could ring up, make a wish and be like, gotta get my daughter tickets. But like, you know, you would have no clue that this is the behind the scenes of this child, and she knows everything about it.
Yeah, right.
She is like all the way through asked questions, you know, 4 years old, talking to your daughter at 4 years old about, because she was so clued in to the world, going into hospital, you have to explain to a 4-year-old why you're going into hospital. And we tried our best to protect her from what the outcomes of that could be, but she wasn't daft. Like
I've got 2 daughters, one at 8 and one at 4. Both of them have just turned. And I think I would absolutely dread, you know, that conversation, like not only just the situation, but that conversation to try and explain to a 4-year-old, you know, what could potentially happen and what's on the cards here. Just for anybody that's maybe going through what you've went through, is there any advice you could give them for, you know, from the 20-week scan onwards?
Yeah, you have to talk about it, and that's the thing I didn't do. You know. At that time, actually, I was here. I was in Home-Start. I was working as a dad's worker, and so I threw myself probably more into that, and so I was like heavy into my work and trying to help other people, and I think I recognised that, you know, I needed to talk more about it. And when I reflect on that time of not connecting with her, I did need to talk, and I've course corrected on that. I tell everybody now, but I think what we didn't get from the support that we were hoping for was a connection with other people to talk to. So all we got was like online stories, and then not having. So when we would try and talk to other people that were in similar situations, it always felt like they were in a worse position than us, and so that we were the ones helping them. And I'm a worker in this industry of supporting people. My wife's a pharmacist, so you know, we then overshot on, we're trying to be supportive, and then or trying to be supported, and then just supporting other people. But I think if you hit any complication, I think if, you know, be it, you know, a health issue, be it a miscarriage, be it struggling to conceive in the first place, the number one thing, because it is such an emotional toil, is to talk to somebody about it. And there's always going to be somebody in your life that will listen, whether it's a family, whether it's a friend, whether it's someone you work with. I was lucky, like Colette, who is, I don't know, in the scheme of the podcast, how much people have heard so far about the organisation, but Colette, the director here at Home-Start, she was probably one of my closest people that I could talk to, so I knew I could kind of dive into her office at any point and talk to her about stuff. And that was actually easier because it wasn't a friend, it wasn't someone outside, it was, you know, someone at work, but it's someone I knew I could talk to, and, you know, it wouldn't go any further, but at the same time, it was where I needed it. So I think people are willing to listen, no matter what it is that you're going through.
It's finding that person you can share these sort of really intimate, deep things with, and that it's going to be trusted and respected. Thank you for sharing that. And you know, that's I'm always, when I hear your story, when I hear other stories, it's always amazing what people have to go through sometimes to me. And I think this is part of the whole journey with the pregnancies. You don't know what's coming because we know. And the more you talk to people, you realize that I mean, the specific condition that your daughter has, that's not that common, but issues in pregnancy are actually quite common.
Yeah.
And like you say, whether it's a miscarriage, whether it's a stillbirth, these kinds of things, they're more common than that we're often led to believe. And when you hear the lack of support that's out there, that's concerning, because it's not just the odd, I heard about so and so. There's often a number of incidences in communities where people are not getting the support they need, and still that stigma of, well, especially for dads, I shouldn't talk about it. It's not about me, it's about my partner. Yet you have experienced this, you are part of this process, this is your child, and for whatever's happened, you need to talk to someone about it. It's not, by talking about it, you're not putting yourself ahead of your partner, you're taking responsibility for where you're at. And I think that's I think that issue of communication, not only between partners, but communicating with someone who you can trust with that information, who can support you in a good way, and not just tell you to man up, which is a huge problem. Just man up, be a man about it.
I think that's
tough.
what you were told when you were a kid. I had a really bad iron burn in my leg when I was a kid. It was a old school iron heat on a stove, and it fell off and landed in the back of my leg, and it was really quite bad. And I was in hospital, blah blah blah. Wow. And I remember I was getting some bloods, and I remember the nurse saying, "Be a big brave soldier, don't cry. Your granny's just on the other side of that curtain." And I was only like 6 years old, and I always remember the nurse's face, and I always remember trying not to cry the best I could, and be a big brave boy was drummed into you at that age, and talking about your feelings or talking about your emotions or your hardships was always seen as almost defeative,
and a weakness.
Or weakness. It was well, what are you talking about that for? Have a beer and bury it deep down and don't discuss it anymore. But I'm hoping that the world's turned a corner on this old fashioned way of looking at things. I think my dad was probably in that boat where he didn't talk about anything ever. But I'm glad that the world's changing, and we're actually here just to encourage people to talk about these things. There's a lot of groups out there that you could get support from. Home-Start as well, we offer support. In like a previous podcast, we discussed these support avenues that you could go down, and the same applies here. If you've went through any of these topic subjects, reach out, get support.
If if anything you've heard today has triggered something, and we support dads through the whole process, whether it's pregnancy, whether your kids are 5 or 6 years old. It's very much our role to support you as best we can. There's so much there, and I wish we could discuss a lot more along these lines. But Ryan, thank you for sharing. Thank you for coming in today.
Thanks for having me.
And it's been good to catch up. And thank you, Joe, for just highlighting what we can do. I've enjoyed this time. As we've said before, we do tackle some of the more difficult issues. We don't shy away from that. Thank you for listening, and we hope you tune in next time.
Yeah, thanks very much, guys. Thank you.
Cheers.